So, for today's Dharma discussion, I'd like to start off with a pretty simple question. And I want you to think of the first thing that comes to your mind. You don't have to say it out. I just want you to reflect on the first thing that comes to your mind and answer this question. The question is, who are you? Who are you? You know, we think this should be an easy question to answer because we know ourselves better than anyone else, and who is dearer to ourselves than ourselves. And we do have a tendency to spend an inordinate amount of time with ourselves. And we do think about ourselves all the time. As Terence Keenan writes, he says, to each of us, it is we who are most real to ourselves. It is we who are most real to ourselves. And yet when we ask the question, who are you? It's interesting the answers we come up with. Let me ask a similar question. What is your true self? What is your true self? And I want you to play with that in your head. Who am I? What is my true self? And this question isn't much easier than the first question. I think a lot of us find ourselves coming to the Buddhist tradition because that question is in our mind. Who am I? What is this all about? Maybe the traditions we came from, the traditions of our parents, are no longer answering that question for us. Maybe they never did. That's what the Buddha spent 6 years after he left his family, his wife, his son. He went to discover, what is it? Who am I? Who are we? And what is this continual cycle of life, birth, and death, and suffering that we all experience? And it's interesting because this I am that we hold close to, is trapped in a singularity of misapprehension of reality. And that's one of the insights of the Buddha in his awakening. The reality is that everything changes, and it changes constantly. This can be problematic for the logical rationality of the ego and the need to control reality. We want to know the plot of our play. We want to write the plot of our play. But reality is rarely a partnership. Mostly of what we call ourselves is a collage, an accumulation of selves. We're like hermit crabs. Reality is that the story self is not so much in touch with reality. With each one of these stories, each one of these accumulations, our ego is trying to create a sense of stability. Our language betrays us. I am, fill in the blank. I am is the ego's need to control and simplify. It's a need to turn our lives away from the unpredictable and ever-changing to the stable. We conceptualize our lives. The problem is that life is not conceptual. Gyomay Kubose Sensei teaches us that concepts are not real life. One Zen teacher teaches us that reality is not logical. Truth is not rational. Only our minds are. We are also so egotistical with arrogance that we want to make reality into a concept, reduce life to a logical idea. But truth is when we drop all concepts, all ideas of what things should be to what they really are. We talked about this before. Who we really are is underneath all the stories and all the ideas we have of who we are and what things are. And that's one of the purposes of meditation, is to get past that noise to the underlying true self. So let's go back to the question. Who are you? It's interesting when we go to a party as Americans and we want to get to know somebody and we ask them, we don't say, hey, who are you? What do we ask them? What do you do? And that is very distinctly American. Okay? So, it's kind of interesting because what we do, does that say anything about us?
Yes, it
I
does.
work in a call center. Does that say anything about me?
Yes, it does.
Does it?
Yes, it does.
Me working in a call center, does it say anything about me?
Yeah, I'm totally into human behavior. Yes, it does. It says that you're okay being in a certain space for a long period of time.
Okay.
You like talking to people. It says a lot of things about what you like to do.
So what if I told you I worked IT in a call center and I hate talking to people? So here's the challenge when we say that, is that we make a whole bunch of stereotypical assumptions by what we do. It gives us an illusion of understanding someone. Think of your father and what he did. And anybody that had problematic relationships with your father, you can understand this. Or your mother. If she worked outside the home, what did she do? Does that tell you anything really about the complexity of who they are? Does it tell us anything about the complexity of who we are? And it's very interesting. It's as if, though, the job makes the person. Right? Now, there are some jobs that we like to attach an identity to. I am a teacher. I am a doctor. Right? These are seen as positives. But I can tell you right now, you can meet a bunch of teachers and a bunch of doctors who are victimizers. It tells us nothing about them. It tells us nothing about each other. I think of my father, the salesman. He was so much more complicated than that. The sad little boy who wanted to take care of his mother, but had no ability to do it. My sister, who works with at-risk youth, who was lost in our family, who turned into a ghost because no one saw her, because there was too much going on with everything else and trying to just live. She was abandoned in the midst of our family. So the fact that she works with at-risk youth might give you insight why she chose that career path, but it doesn't tell you anything about her. And what I'm trying to point is a lot of the things that we say, we self-label, I am this, I am that, says very little about who we really are. At the same time, reading some people's obituaries breaks my heart. To try to encapsulate the complexity of a human life in 2 column inches. As if a human life has anything to do with golf, or sports, or fishing. Although these things are wonderful things and can bring great enjoyment, but a human life is more than fishing. I was at a function once. The speaker asked us to think about something we really liked about ourselves. And I've done that in groups before. I've even done that in therapy, and there's value in it. But this time when she asked that, for some reason it was different. And I realized that much of what I would choose to say would support some aspect of my idea or concept of self, or the masks that I wanted to show the group. Again, it's this problematic I am, that stated to think that I am statement. I started to think I am kind, I am compassionate, except when I'm not kind, and I'm not compassionate. And those are probably as frequent as they are with each other. I just choose not to see them. And as part of our awareness practice is to look honestly and to acknowledge that I can be compassionate, but I can also be the opposite. That I can be kind, but I too can be cruel. I am has this static, this fixedness to it, that this is the way it is. And it's not true. Okay? We can get stuck in identifying our certain ways. If I say I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic, yes, but I'm so much more. I'm so much more than that. Inherently, by my Buddha nature, I'm boundless. And we can get too attached to these concepts, constructions of self. It's interesting, too, for those who call themselves misanthropes. We had two who participated in our winter retreat, and they said, oh, I just don't really like people. And I go, how interesting that is that you've come to a workshop on compassionate. We give ourselves away constantly. The I am gives us the impression that this is the totality of our being. It also gives the impression of some stability. I've always thought of myself as compassionate. But this is not the reality of who I am. It's a concept that I give to myself. It is a small facet of who I can be. All such concepts tend to be relative, and since they are relative, they have within themselves the natural instability of dynamic change. Reality is not separate, but one with all other things. This is what we mean when we say the oneness of all things. This is the insight of the Buddha. Gyomay Kubose Sensei says, the I, is the sum total of all other people and things. Thus, all that I am is the sum total of others. There is not I as such apart from others. I has many states, always changing. I am father because of children. I am husband because of wife. I am teacher because of students. I am old compared with young. It is all a relative existence. Yes?
Could we, when we look at this, are you saying I would like to be seen as? So it's not, I'd like to be seen as a good man. I'd like to be seen as a good father. I'd like to be seen as trustworthy. And then when we take that into ourselves, I'd like, and actually look at who you are. I want to see myself as, not only be seen as, but see myself as. I think that's the biggest struggle is we try to fill ourselves with labels. And of course we're imperfect. And so we're constantly in a state of breaking these projections.
I think, too, that an aspiration is wanting to see ourselves some way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think it is important for us to be aware, to see who we really are as we are.
My name's James. Had a thought. Wanted to mention the scriptures, but I kind of had a practice that I did a while ago where I read them from different perspectives. I tried to imagine what it would be like from the perspective of the viewer, if that makes sense.
What?
The writer, the viewer.
Uh-huh.
Like when it says, you know, who art thou? And it says, I am that I am. It's a little bit of a, I think it's a realization that we're always in a state of flux. You are what you are, you know. There is no what, you know.
Thank you. I like that. Kind of paradoxical at the same time. It's interesting because who we are is a multiplicity. As Walt Whitman said, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. So this question of who I am is very important in Buddhism for understanding who we really are on this path of the Buddha Dharma. Again, from Gyomay Kubose Sensei. Many people think they know who they are, but we have to remember that yesterday's I is not today's I or tomorrow's. We are continually living a new life. We are continually living a new life. Niche koriko jitsu. Every day is a good day. Every day is a new life. There is no self as such that does not change. This is the doctrine of non-self. What I am is the sum total of other things and people. The insight of the Buddha is that this thing we call self is not what we think it is. It is not self-contained, self-existent, separate from life. Yet that's how we apprehend life. It is not bound by fate, nor free from consequence, but interwoven with all of existence. And I love this. I found this from the writing of a Christian pastor. And he says, we are more gift than achievement. Our lives are more gift than achievement. As Americans, that can be rough to acknowledge that. The ego thinks of its achievement. The more it achieves, the more it proves to itself that life is controllable, rational, formulaic, something to be deciphered, but in the end, it is not. We are more gift than accomplishment. When we can free ourselves of the I am this or that, we begin to see all the grace that abounds. We see how little we actually put into our existence, how little control we have. We see in the meme, you think you have control, relax, you don't have it. For most of us, we don't think, I'm not relaxing, I'm in control. That's the opposite of relaxation. That's pure stress. But that's also the reality of the situation and the path to freedom. We can breathe for the first time when we stop trying to control everything. We can begin to sense the deep gratitude with change and change our relationship to other things, to our lives. This might help us to awaken to our authentic self, the dynamic self of the oneness of life. We learn to respond instead of react. We start to see the notes of life's musical score in all things, and the music is beautiful. This is when we clearly see the self and the storied self that are sustained by all things. We come to see the true self. I've been reading the teachings of a Shin teacher, Hideo Yonezawa, And he really hasn't been translated in English, except a book recently. And I just want to share a few insights he shares. We learn that we cannot live alone. We live by receiving. That's the truth of our existence. That's the truth of every day of our existence, of every moment of our life. Every breath we take is a life of receiving. We can't live without receiving. So I want to ask you a question. How good are you at receiving? How often do we not take the gift? Maybe it's something as simple as a hand up, or somebody opening the door, or somebody offering that. And we're so delusional because we think if we need help, if we receive help, we will be unlovable, or that we will somehow be weak, or somehow defective or broken. No, our whole existence is receiving. So I ask you a question, how are you at receiving? And if you go, how are you at joyfully receiving? That's the next step. It's to embrace the gift. So how do you feel as a gift giver when you give a gift to somebody and they're just ecstatic? Okay? In Buddhism, it's called sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy is amazing because it has nothing to do with you, really. It's just the joy of another person, and you feel it. You sense it. I remember years ago, me and my first wife had been divorced, and my life was at a bad point. I was living in somebody's room in their house, and it was a weird house. I had a little black and white TV, and I was watching Perry Mason reruns. I just lost my job with my first girlfriend. I loved her so much. We broke up, and it was an ugly breakup. And here I am, and my motorcycle was broken, and she was leaving and taking my dog. Wow. I mean, I was 40 years old, thinking I'm a failure. I have achieved nothing in my life. And I'm talking to her, and she's talking about how happy she is to going to California and her new man and how good he is to her and the opportunities. And I felt nothing but joy for her. No envy. I wasn't angry. I felt joy. And I go, that is sympathetic joy. It has nothing to do with ego. When we're able to receive, and we're able to acknowledge the receipt of something from someone else, we can tap into that sympathetic joy. Joyful receiving. Yonezawa goes on to write, receiving all things from the universe, like we do, like the earth, the air, water, rice. Even rice cannot be grown without air and water, the sun and moon. When we begin to see that we are sustained and given life by all things, we start to awaken to the true self.
You had said how hard it is to receive with joy. The next step, I feel like, especially if we're the doctors and we're the healers, we're supposed to not receive, right? We're supposed to give. But then the next step is, do we receive it with joy? And then how soon do we think we need to pay that back? So that's the next step in saying, you just have to receive it. That's so hard. So hard.
In our culture, we see everything as economic exchanges. And we see gifts as economic exchanges. So in Buddhism, there is no gift, there is no giver, and there is no receiver. Right? Have you noticed that the hats that Buddhist monks wear when they go up to beg for food, they have their begging bowl, they have their round hat, and it's like this. And in the rules of the Vinaya, or the rules of the monastic order, they were not allowed to look at the person who was giving a gift. And That way there isn't this like, oh, he smiled at me, oh, he really likes the gift I gave, oh, this is great. Or he was so ungrateful, his nose went up when he smelled my food. And all these things that get in the way of the act itself. The act itself, without whatever the intention is. We get so hung up on, well, they did this because of that. Or they did this, they gave me this, it's because I did this for them. Or they gave me this because they're feeling guilty. We get so caught up in the conceptual world that we're not experiencing simply what is in front of us. So he goes on. We get so hung up in the stories that we don't see the things that are actually sustaining our lives. How egotistical we are. How small-minded as humans when we so proudly assert, I built this. Yes, but you didn't do it alone. The sun helped you build it. The moon helped you build it. The air helped you build it. The water helped you build it. Your ancestors helped you build it. Your teachers helped you build it. All the things that sustain us every day help you be who you are and do what you do. We can deny our relationship to all things, and we do a good job if we look at the global calamity which is facing us. We deny our connection to the world. We think that we can simply use it as a resource and it will supply us our needs. We know what happens once the bees are gone, don't we? We know what happens once the polar caps have melted. Planet Earth will be fine. She ain't going anywhere.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I'd refer you to Percy Bysshe Shelley, Ozymandias, I believe is the poem. If you haven't read it, it's a good one to look up and read. It talks about how great this king is and what he has created. And it's written on this kind of like this crumbling, I don't know, a piece of wall or something that's crumbling. In the desert, that's alone. It's just falling apart. In the desert, there's nothing there but that.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of interesting. So Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a book called No Exit. It was about a bunch of people in hell. And the irony of the play is they're all in hell and they're all suffering. But the door's open. They can leave anytime they want. They just get out, walk out. But they would rather sit and do dueling dysfunction. Have you ever had that situation? Sitting around with some friends, and especially certain friends. They said, well, my mom. And how often do we do that ourselves? Or we do that inside our own minds. Or just the opposite, which can be just as damaging, diminish our own suffering. And say it doesn't count. My suffering's not real because I have it easy. Suffering is suffering. Yes, it can give us perspective, but we have a tendency to diminish it, that it doesn't exist, and we don't honor our experience. We go around in this self-imposed solitary confinement, not realizing that the door's open. Then we can walk out. And our meditation and awareness practice is to allow us to slow down and underneath those stories and thoughts about ourselves so that we can notice that the door is unlocked. That we even know to try to open the door. That we even notice that there's a door there to walk through. Or a window, or a hole, or a crack, or whatever it is that lets the light in. To break ourselves free of this, we need to become aware of our relationship to all things, then most of our usual definitions of who we are so shallow and superficial. Until we experience the significance of this relationship, it'll be hard for us to experience a profound and transformative gratitude. Without this gratitude, it's hard to cultivate a dynamic humility. And without cultivating a dynamic humility, we struggle to experience at times more than the conceptual and not experience the awe of the oneness of all things. He goes on to say, all things are Buddhas. All things are Buddha. The sun, the moon, the earth, and rice. All things sustain us and give us life. In a life of awareness, we, in gratitude, put our hands together and humbly gasho to all things. We humbly gasho to all things. When we are reverent to all things become Buddha. It's a world of nothing but Buddhas. Sayachi, illiterate poet, barely write, and made wooden clogs. He said in one of his poems, "Isn't it wonderful? The world is filled with Buddhas, and I too live among them." Namo Amida Butsu. Any last comments? Anything anybody would like to share before we close? As my teacher, Kakuyo Sensei says, have a beautiful Sunday! Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful!